On this week's Movie HighLow, we're talking Teamsters, Solidarity, and a bunch of guys named Tony. Whatever you need us to do, we're available. This is Martin Scorsese's The Irishman.
So we're just getting warmed up here.
Well, I'd like to thank any of our listeners, all three of them, that I'd like to thank anybody that put up with listening to me last week talk with my nasally congested voice. I think I still actually feel a little bit sick, I guess.
You sound better.
I sound way better than I did last Sunday, absolutely.
Yeah, it wasn't, you sounded rough, but it was also, you were in the thick of it. You were at the worst part of it. So sometimes, and the thing that's crazy, like this time of year, like when you get a head cold like that, it is not easy to kick.
No. Well, sleep is a big part of it. I mean, when you're working and you're up early every day and you're going to bed late, it's like if you're not getting a good night's sleep, like it takes so much longer to get better, and that's part of the problem. Then the weekend comes and you're able to sleep in more, and it's like I feel better instantly because I was able to get more sleep. So that's a big part of it.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Movie HighLow, a podcast discussing the best and worst that cinema has to offer. I'm Dom.
And this is Dee.
And today we are talking a film that I love very dearly. It seems very appropriate for the fact that we're going to be getting into Oscar season, or Oscars are going to actually be next week. This movie's up for quite a few awards, so we figured it would be apropos to make it one of the podcasts leading into the 2020 Oscars. My goal for this episode is to not talk for the same runtime as the movie, because I feel like I could talk about this movie forever. But
oh man, that just made me think of the joke Ricky Gervais made that I love so much at the Golden Globes, where he goes, I think it was The Irishman he was talking about, it was like 3.5 hours. By the time the movie was over, Leonardo DiCaprio's girlfriend was too old for him. I loved that joke. That was good.
That was a good one.
That just made me think of that.
But yes, so the movie this week is The Irishman, directed by Martin Scorsese, released on limited screens November 1st, 2019, and then on streaming for wide audiences on Netflix November 27th, 2019. This is a high episode, says who? Well, IMDb has it at an 8.0 rating, 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it is, of course, nominated for 10 Oscars at this year's Academy Awards.
Is Best Director one of them?
Best Directing, and two for Best Actor in a Supporting Role, Al Pacino and Joe Pesci. Best Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design, Best Production Design, Best Film Editing. Best film editing, of course, Thelma Shoemaker. I hope she wins. God bless her. Of course.
Oh, maybe I'm thinking of Sally Menke or whatever.
Yeah, Sally Menke passed
Tarantino.
away. She passed away.
Right.
But Thelma Shoemaker is the greatest editor in film history, as far as I'm concerned. Best achievement in visual effects. Well, I'm sure we'll get to that later. And of course, Best Picture of the Year. The only thing really noticeably absent from this roll call is Best Actor in a Leading Role, which would have
been De
Niro, and I think he was I think he was very, very, very sorely overlooked this year. I think it's very easy to overlook him.
That's like I never know when to start talking, but even for De Niro, that I can't even say this movie was one of his finest performances. I mean, all the movies he's been in, all the great things, it's like this was him doing what he does best. I wouldn't even say this is best actor material for him. I think of things, obviously not talking about Meet the Parents or whatever, or any of the bullshit he's done, but like the classic roles that he's been in for decades, like over the decades. I don't look at this movie and think, wow, De Niro just shines. He should get, I mean, I'm sorry. I'm not saying he's bad. He's not, but it's not like it's something worthy of that. It's not at that level for him.
I respectfully disagree.
Okay.
I'm sure
I'm not saying it's bad. It's just like my overall opinion of the movie as a whole too. It's not that it's bad. I said it's like cheese pizza or a bombed out pizza with all your favorite toppings on it from your favorite restaurant. It's like, yeah, cheese pizza is good, but is it great? I mean, or talking about pizza from your favorite place, making it just the way you want it, where it's a masterpiece, a work of art. To me, for Scorsese, for De Niro, all the actors in the movie even, I'm sorry, like it's not the best example of any of these great men's work. To me, it's not.
Well, this is going to be a very interesting episode of Movie HighLow because even though it is a high episode, we're going to disagree. I feel like we're going to disagree quite a bit on this movie. And that's okay. And again, we'll get into it.
We disagreed on the car ride home when we first saw it too, and I mean, I think that's part of why you thought this would be a good one to do for the podcast.
And it's also I just selfishly I just have a lot to say about this movie because I really feel like there's a lot of especially approaching the Oscars this year, and also just in general kind of the take on Martin Scorsese over the past couple months. I just feel like this is an important episode to talk. Not important, but it's a good episode to get into because for me, I think this is one of Scorsese's best movies. I think this is a landmark film.
I think it could have been maybe among them if he had gone with younger actors in these roles. I think that takes you out of it.
Let's get into all of that in a minute because we're going to go through the highs and lows. And there's certainly some stuff I agree with you on. But before we get there, let me do a quick synopsis of the film. 1950s Teamster Frank Sheeran is caught when a significant amount of meat that he transports somehow happens to fall off the truck. After being miraculously acquitted of the charges thanks to his union lawyer, he's formally introduced to Russell Bufalino, a soft-spoken but high-ranking member of the Philadelphia Mafia. Frank, a former World War II soldier, quickly becomes an expert house painter and carpenter, and eventually crosses paths with the infamous head of Teamsters, James Riddle Hoffa. A lifelong friendship is formed, as is a lifetime of union pension scams and systematic mob hits. But as Frank becomes more and more immersed in the world of organized crime, he will eventually learn the true cost of having compromised his family, morality, and soul.
Very well written, yes.
The first thing I just want to point out that I thought was really kind of rad was that there's no Irishman opening credit. The movie's called The Irishman, but the movie, from what I've read, was not supposed to originally be called The Irishman. I think the preference would have been to have called it the name of the book, Houses, which is I Heard You Paint Houses. Right. And when you watch the film, there is not an opening credit that says The Irishman. The Irishman is not shown until the closing credits. So the opening credits actually say, I Heard You Paint Houses. And I think that was kind of punk rock of Marty Scorsese to pull that off. There's a whole point in the movie where they're talking about where I think De Niro's character says something to the effect of young people today don't know who Jimmy Hoffa was or how important he was. And, I don't necessarily consider myself very young. I'm in my mid-30s. But it's true. Like when he says most people, they when they think of Jimmy Hoffa, they think, oh, well, he's a guy who they know disappeared, but that's really
right. They don't know about the man he was before that.
That's really the extent. I mean, maybe he was involved in the Teamsters.
But if he had never disappeared, would they still know who he was? Well, maybe, I guess.
Or it's just you just don't realize. Like he likens him to he says that like he's like this guy in the 50s was like Elvis. This guy in the 60s was like the Beatles.
Like people might think of like young people today might think of O.J. Simpson, right? And they might think about the car chase. Oh, I know about the car chase, but they might not realize he had a successful career in football and acting before that. Even like I just know about the Bronco chase. Like, do you know what I mean?
It's crazy. It's and
when you're young and don't know.
And to watch this movie,
why in the Carrie remake are they quoting Adam Sandler? It's like actually Adam Sandler's quoting the original Carrie, which actually took place. But you're obviously, I mean, and you can't even just say it's a young people thing because there's plenty of young people who are informed, but there's also a chunk of young people that just don't know. Watching
this film, like I had no idea that Jimmy Hoffa had control of the Teamsters pensions and essentially was using it to gap finance loans for the mob. That all of that shit completely escaped me. I had no idea that was the reality of what this guy was. And when you start to think about that, it is quite fascinating to think that here's a guy who, in his prime, they say it in the film, and I don't think it's hyperbolic. I think it's quite probably real that this is a guy who, at his prime, was secondary to the president in terms of popularity and power, because he was the head of the Teamsters union, and because at that time unions,
he had his hands in that many pots too.
I mean, it's kind of crazy. First high of this movie is, of course, the great Martin Scorsese, the great direction from what I think I have nothing but respect and reverence for, what I think is one of the greatest American filmmakers of all time, and is such an important director. And I think this is such a great movie because for me it's showing that he's still on top of his game. He's still making, as far as I'm concerned, some of the best work that he's ever made in his career. And on top of that, it's like he's putting a capstone on the genre that he...
Thank you. That's what I was going to say, and I thought you were going to disagree with me on that. Was that this is the kind of movie that he's known for making. He's made this type of movie, this style of movie before, and is very masterful at it because he comes from an Italian American background. That the music, the sights, the smells, the taste, the food, I mean, everything. It's like he knows and understands that life more than, I'm not saying more than most, but I mean, as a director, he's able to have that voice from his own firsthand experience when he makes Goodfellas and Casino or even Gangs in New York, which, and in its own way, I mean, it's not about, there are things about Italian Americans, but it's like he's able to make these gritty mob or gang related movies. It's very much kind of something he does, and I don't feel like this movie was him doing anything that different than what he's already done. Not that it wasn't great, and
I disagree.
That's fine. Tell me what, aside from the de-aging, what did he do in this movie that was so different?
Well, we're gonna get into
outside
the
of his wheelhouse.
We're gonna get into the difference is that this is when I say
this is Martin Scorsese doing what he knows best. To me.
What I mean by this is that when I say he's putting a capstone on it, what I'm saying is that what it seems like he's doing is almost like he's trying to give the final word on a genre that he has helped to define his entire career.
Okay.
And not even just him, the actors in this movie.
Okay.
Scorsese, I'm sorry, De Niro, Pesci.
But do you remember that's what I said when we were talking about this? I think that's exactly why it was so important for him to cast them, even though it took us out of it, both of us, to see them with the de-aging and not buy into it and kind of remove you from, like, the performances are great, they're great actors.
All right, well, let's not get ahead, because the lows, you and I are going to talk about the de-aging, probably ad nauseum and a lot.
It's not just the de-aging. I remember I said I feel like this is kind of him and the actors, him doing it for them and them doing it for him. It's a mutual transaction where it's kind of like this is the swan song for them a little bit, because they're all of them are getting, I mean, Pacino, De Niro, Pesci, in addition to Martin Scorsese, are all getting older.
It's the final word. It's the final word.
And it's not that they're all going to just retire or whatever, but this is kind of the end of an era of this style of movie with this type of actor. I get that. And to me, that's the only reason it makes sense why he would have gone with them and not younger actors for the younger scenes.
But I think that's why it's so important that he did it his way. Not to quote Sinatra, but that he did it his way. The elephant in the room right now, and again, I think we're going to talk about it a little bit more in depth, but the de-aging is a problem in this movie. And as someone who loves the movie, the de-aging is a problem, okay? But my attitude when I think about this film is that Martin Scorsese has made his entire career, quite frankly, he's done amazing, beautiful movies outside of this genre, but really, when you think of Martin Scorsese, you think of him as a mob film director. Yeah. For all of the criticism that he's received or has been leveled against him throughout his career about glamorizing violence or glamorizing the mob, this is a movie that really nobody can say that about for him, because really what he has done very, very meticulously and carefully is to almost drain all of the energy out of the movie, not because he doesn't know how to energize a film or put a soundtrack to it or make it move fast. Casino is a 3-hour movie that moves faster than most hour-and-a-half movies I've ever seen. Martin Scorsese knows how to make a 3-hour movie. I feel the same about Goodfellas. Right. He knows how to make a movie that's long, and he knows how to make it have a motor on it. But he almost rips the motor off this movie because what he's trying to do is, in the end, he's trying to like almost pull the veil away and say, okay, if we're talking about these characters and we're talking about this lifestyle and we're talking about this world, in the end, not only does it end badly, it ends without dignity. It ends quietly and morosely and lonely. And alone. You know, here's a character who, you know, without jumping ahead, has to kill his best friend and doesn't want to. And not only that, has spent his entire life alienating his entire family and all of the people that should love him, so that when he goes to his grave, he is literally a person who has to like pick out his own casket because no one's going to be there to make the plans for him. There's something really powerful and really sad and really real about what he's doing here. Okay. And you can say that it doesn't have the same zip as Goodfellas, or it doesn't move quite like Casino, but it's trying to do something different. It's not trying to do that type of movie. I'm so happy that Martin Scorsese got the opportunity to put the final word on the mob movie, that no matter what happens, maybe years from now, even people that are like, oh, it's too long or it's boring, will look back at this movie and be like, wow, that really was kind of like the third act of the overarching story he's been telling on the mob through his whole career. Something about our culture right now that really bothers me, and it just kind of strikes a chord when it comes to this movie. There was this whole thing that happened with Martin Scorsese this year where they were talking about, he was being interviewed, I forget if it's Empire or what magazine it was, he was being interviewed for press on The Irishman, and they happened to ask him about what he thought about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And he made a comment where he said something to the effect of, yeah, that's not cinema. And he likened them to more of like, they're more like rides at a theme park.
It's an amusement.
Okay.
It's an entertainment distraction.
And everybody on the internet, I shouldn't say everybody, but like
a lot of people,
the lowest common denominator lost its shit. Okay. They just went nuts on him. And it's just indicative of this very kind of bullshit clickbaity culture that we have now that really
is just so eager to believe the first thing they see and not really do any research into finding out the truth.
And he followed it up with and I would recommend anybody check this out, he followed it up with a very thoughtful op-ed kind of clarifying his thoughts. And if you read it, it's very intellectual and very smart. And what he's really talking about is the idea of how cinema is changing and how cinema is going away.
It is.
And the fact that
he's right in what he said.
The fact that when you go to a movie theater now, there's less and less independent movie theaters that exist in America. And when you go to a theater now, your only option are franchises, and how that's a little bit dangerous, and how the idea that like, if you are only gonna go see a movie that's been market tested and been run through a conveyor belt and has been made by committee, that we're gonna lose something. We're gonna lose something that's important about
the voice
movies.
of the independent filmmaker or the everyday stories that are out there to be told.
And people aren't paying attention to that. And what they're doing is they're taking, Martin Scorsese said, fuck Marvel, and they're taking a mean looking picture of him and putting it on Facebook, and all of a sudden it's like 700 comments about
and we know him, like,
fuck this guy, he should die, he's an old man.
We don't know him, but like, I feel like every time you hear him in an interview, I mean, he just seems so humble, kind. He's not that kind of, like, yeah, sure, people could argue we don't know him personally, so what do you really know? But we know that he doesn't have that bone. Even if it's the shittiest movie ever, he would never say that this movie is shit. He's not that kind of person, or that kind of filmmaker that he would try to be discouraging to other filmmakers. It was totally taken out of context and conflated into this whole stupid thing. And it's like you're saying, it's very clickbaity culture. Absolutely. People that want to see something online, you see some stupid passing thing, which could be based out of nonsense. Who knows what facts they even are basing it off of, and they're so quick to believe it without even doing any research or finding out more truth about it. They're quick to believe it. But then also we live in a very PC culture. It starts to feel like you can't say anything. You can't have an opinion about anything without being considered, you're going after somebody. And it's like, that's not what he was doing. And he absolutely has a point. Movie going when we were kids was different. Movie going when my parents and our grandparents were kids was different. It's totally a different landscape now. I mean, we're getting to a point where they're probably going to not have movie theaters at all anymore. And if they do, it's just for Marvel, DC, it's for the Fast and the Furious. It's all for those big blockbuster movies. That's what people want. They want to see special effects, tits, ass, fast-paced, entertain me. I don't want to forget about reading subtitles. I mean, there's people that do, but the mass audiences, that's what they want. They want easy to digest. They just want to be entertained and distracted for a couple of hours.
But that's what he was trying to...
It's fucking sad.
But that's what he was trying to say. I know
that's what he's saying.
That's what he was trying to say. And what people turned it into was really ridiculous. And what really upsets me about that is, first of all, the clickbaity culture thing really pisses me off in and of itself. But what really pisses me off about it more than anything, honestly, is that he's an older guy. And what it feels like now is that it's more indicative of our culture is that we don't respect our elders. Our culture is very disrespectful of people who are older because they feel like they're out of touch or they don't get it, or a lot of the knee-jerk reactions that I saw to that were like, oh, he's jealous, he's an old guy, he doesn't, and it's almost like we're ready to read some little paraphrased bullshit thing that was written in some article,
taken completely out of context,
and we're ready to take this guy and put him on an ice float and send him adrift, as if he wasn't
That's the climate we live in
as if
now.
he's not one of the most influential and most important filmmakers of all time. That shit really bothers me.
And it's important to make the distinction with the comment he made. He is absolutely correct. Think about the types of movies he makes, the types of movies that he would go to see, the types of movies that we would go to see versus these comic book movies.
I wouldn't,
and it's not that they're bad or whatever. I'm not saying that, but it's a very different type of movie going experience, and that type of movie going experience that he was referring to is becoming more and more extinct. He's absolutely right. I see it and feel it. You used to work in video stores. They don't have video stores anymore. Same thing with movie theaters. You worked in a movie theater. You're seeing less and less of those. And the ones you see are megaplexes that only play that shit. There's less and less of the independently owned movie theaters. How is he talking out of his ass with anything he said in that?
And again,
it's absolutely true.
Here's a guy, like, I wouldn't ask my 85-year-old grandfather. I wouldn't be like,
he wouldn't even word it as well.
I wouldn't be like, Grandpa, what do you think of Iron Man? You know what I mean? That's not his thing. And this is another thing. And I just got to bring this up. James Gunn pissed me off so much when this article came out. His tweet was something to the effect of, I didn't agree when people protested Martin Scorsese's
Last Temptation of Christ
without seeing it. I feel bad that he feels that way about my movies.
Right.
It's like,
and it's so not the same thing.
Hey, buddy, first of all, Martin Scorsese isn't protesting Marvel movies.
Exactly. He's not boycotting Captain America and Marvel movies. He's not rallying against them and having people sign petitions to get them taken out of theaters. He's just saying it's a different climate now than it used to be. That's all he said. That's what I'm saying. Everything he said was taken out of context, and exactly, that's infuriating. It's like, that's not even what he said.
And
You're just twisting it around.
Not only that, he's not protesting Marvel movies. He's not saying anyone shouldn't go. He's not naming you. He's not saying anything's wrong with Guardian of the Galaxy. So why are you making it about yourself?
People,
and you know what the worst
like
part is? You know what the worst part is? I like James Gunn a lot. He's a great director. I love Guardians of the Galaxy. He made a great film called Super a couple of years ago with Rainn Wilson that's hilarious. You are a director. You know what it's like to be taken out of context. Why are you piling on? Don't pile on against this guy.
Everything he said, I agree. Some people, you're totally fine to disagree. Anyone is allowed to their opinion. But I don't think anything he said, and I know you don't think anything he said was meant to be hurtful and offensive, and it was completely taken out of context. It's ridiculous.
And here's my favorite thing. Coppola eventually piled on a little bit, and Coppola actually said some more inflammatory shit that I think was a little... I don't care, but I still think it was a little bit... Coppola was more like, Marty was being kind about it. These movies aren't not cinema, they're despicable. Like, he said something to that effect, where I was like, all right, that's a little bit too much.
Who said despicable? Who's the word despicable? Right, okay.
Coppola. But here's the thing.
Okay, so Coppola is the one who's actually throwing punches.
He went a little bit more over the line, but here's
How come people aren't shitting all over Coppola now?
They were. Of course they were. But Coppola doesn't give a shit.
But at least in that case, he's asking for it. He's being much more blunt.
But whatever. All that aside... This was my favorite. This is my favorite thing, and this is where I think a fundamental amount of respect and integrity was implemented. Okay, at one point, someone grabbed Jon Favreau, and everyone knows Jon Favreau is a big part of the MCU. He made Iron Man. He's now part of the Mandalorian. Okay, they pulled Jon Favreau and said, "What do you have to say about the Scorsese and Coppola comments?" And Favreau did it perfectly. He said, Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola inspired me and inspired an entire generation to be film directors.
Yes, they did.
They've earned the right to say whatever they want.
Don't you wish more people had that opinion?
Full stop, period.
Never went down, Ray. You never got me down, Ray.
All right, so jumping into other highs, I just feel like we got highs for days on this fucking thing, but I think one of the other things that's really worthy of mentioning is the performance in this movie. I mean, this is the best that De Niro and Pacino have been in years. In years, these guys have not done work like this.
Okay,
and Pesci has been, he came out of retirement to be a part of this movie. So I just feel like these guys coming back, it's some of the best work that any of them have done in years. Pesci in particular coming out of retirement, it's such a cool way to see him in a Martin Scorsese movie where he's playing such a different type of character than he's
not a hothead.
You're waiting for him to go nuts in this movie. You're waiting him from to blow his top, and he's
Didn't you say there was something like where he was like intentionally trying to hold it back, like the scenes where Pacino's like getting all heated with him, and it's like he had to like. He was doing something to keep himself cool. Yeah. Like he had to like, I don't know what it was exactly.
Well, he's playing more of an old school type of Italian guy where they don't get mad, they don't yell, they don't scream.
You don't get mad, you get even.
Like even the scene before, like there's the whole scene with Joe Gallo where Sebastian Maniscalco plays Joe Gallo and he insults Joe Pesci and there's this whole thing. And the scene is like, Pesci sits down across De Niro. He just looks at him, and De Niro knows, like, okay, we're putting the hit on this guy. And it's such a departure for what we're so used to seeing. Well, you're waiting. Oh, Pesci's in this. He's going to go nuts. He's going to scream. He's going to go bananas.
Well, in some ways, he was kind of the Don in this. He wasn't the Don, but more of a Don than Joe Pesci's been in the other movies he's been in. Do you know what I mean? Like, the Don is actually, I think, Harvey Keitel in this movie, who's, doesn't have as much of a, I guess, role that shows much dimension or whatever. It's more, I don't know what you would call that.
That's a great scene, though. That's a great scene.
But in this movie, Joe Pesci is kind of like a Don. He's kind of like a boss, and because of that, and he's not a boss who's a hot-headed, heavy-handed boss. He's the quiet type,
So
like a
calm,
serpent, like
so even,
snake in the grass, or like don't worry, I'll get you, and you're not going to see me coming. But
very even tempered, very well measured, very calm, very sweet. Actually, one of the funny things I love about Joe Pesci, this is kind of a fun scene when De Niro first meets Joe Pesci when he's the truck driver, when he's still the union guy, and he pulls into the thing, and his truck's all fucked up, and Joe Pesci's looking at it, and he's going, oh, and he's like, I can hear there's something wrong with this belt. This is what you need to get fixed. Blah 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 blah. He's so friendly and nice to him, and De Niro's saying to him, he's like, hey, I'm Frank. What's your name? And he's like, where are you from?
Right.
I'm from Philadelphia. Where do you hang out? I hang out at these places. Oh, I know those places. See you later. Get that belt fixed. He won't tell him his name because he knows, like,
his reputation precedes him.
Exactly.
He's got a reputation.
Exactly. And that's when after De Niro goes through the whole thing where he goes through the whole trial with Ray Romano as his lawyer, and he goes through that whole thing. He meets him. That's his cousin, and then he meets him later, and he's like, "Oh shit, that's the
right."
Please.
Well, because you wanted to talk about bullet points, and I want to piggyback on that as far as a high. I remember I wrote that as one of my highs was that in the beginning of the movie, or the first quarter of the movie at least, it's pretty early on, where it shows him and Pesci, Robert De Niro and Pesci, and their wives in the backseat stopping for smoke breaks every 5 seconds.
Yeah,
that's cute, I guess. But when they stop, one of the first stops, it's like at the Texaco gas station. And what is it? Shutties? What's the name of the place? Hold on. It said it. Stuckey's. That was the name of the place. It was Texaco gas station, like this little coffee shop, restaurant, whatever, diner. Stuckey's. And the fact that plays into a flashback to when they first met each other. Oh, what are the odds? We stopped here, and this is where we first met, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I liked that. It was one of the highs I remember writing down.
There's another kind of interesting nuanced thing, but like De Niro's character, and I don't know enough about Frank Sheeran. I don't know if this is a thing that actually is part of his character, or if this is something that he created, but De Niro kind of has this like stammer throughout the movie where
I noticed.
He does that kind of thing, and it's just this affectation of speech that he built into the character that is, I don't know, it feels very authentic, it feels very real, and also like the where it's implemented in throughout, like there's certain parts of the movie where he gets nervous or he does this, or at the end of the movie when he's talking to the priest, and the priest is like doing the prayers, and he's like trying to repeat the prayers, but he's doing it like he's having a hard time repeating things. I don't know. I think De Niro's performance is so great in this movie.
Well, I was gonna say, as much as the Joe Pesci character is a far cry from his other roles that he's done in the past, it's kind of a similar thing with Robert De Niro in that his character in this movie is almost mousy in some ways, kind of like, I mean, yeah, he paints houses and all this and that. It's like, it's not that he's not tough in his own way, but he's more mild-mannered and subdued and kind of meek. And
he does not start in the film as a mafia guy. He starts in the film as a truck driver. He's a legitimate Teamster. He's a guy who just drives a truck and happens to be a soldier, which is important to the plot of the movie, because he's not a guy who is a part of La Cosa Nostra. He's not a guy who's a part of the mob, but he gets it. He's a guy who, because he's been through the war and because, of his background, is someone who understands how to follow orders, who understands that
duty. People
are expendable, that some people have to be killed. He has a moral flexibility that allows him to very easily ingratiate himself to this world, but he's not of this world. He's a truck driver who's willing to drop a few things off his truck to make some money and happened to have been a soldier, so he can easily facilitate into this world. His daughter Peggy is such an important character in the film, and his daughter Peggy, even as a child, and then when Anna Paquin plays her as an adult, is very different because of the fact that she doesn't have a lot to say or do in the film. A lot of what's required of the young actress who plays the young Peggy and then Anna Paquin later as the older Peggy is that she's not saying anything. That she just kind of looks at her father and knows what he is and knows that you are a criminal and I don't agree with your morality and I'm scared of you. And you've been absent from my life. So why should I be present in your life? And that's, people want to criticize that. Like, why?
Oh, she barely had any dialogue. It's like, but do you understand why she barely had any dialogue?
She's not supposed to. In fact, you only cast an actress as good as Anna Paquin in a role like that to convey that she doesn't have to say barely anything. She can say everything in her eyes. She can say everything. Everything. I think she has one line in the whole movie where she goes, "Why?
Like, why didn't you call?
Why haven't you called?"
Yeah.
That's all she says.
And a couple of thank yous she mutters out at Christmas when she gets the skates from Uncle Russ.
Yeah, and that I love.
And
that.
the $100 bill that she's like, yeah, I know how you got all this.
And then of course Pacino. We can't talk about this movie without talking about Pacino. What a great performance.
Solidarity.
He's given a great performance.
Solidarity.
Even that speech. I'm sure that's a paraphrased version of one of the Hoffa's speeches, but it's a great speech. Like, if you got it, it came off a truck.
Right.
If your fuel, your clothes, your food, it all came off a truck. I really believe, after watching this movie especially, I really believe that Hoffa, as fucked up as a person as he was, and as arrogant and as corrupt as he was, really, to a certain degree, probably really cared about the Union. I think he really did.
Oh, it's his baby.
And I think that that's a way to humanize him in the movie.
Step down, and go to the grave. Right? Like, I'm not going to retire. I like that whole back and forth thing where it's like, he's like, poor Robert De Niro's like the middleman who has to like transfer messages between Tony Salerno, like what Tony Salerno said and then what Jimmy Hoffa said. And it's like, oh yeah? Well, tell him I'm never going to retire now. It just escalates. It escalates on both ends. Tell him he's got to relax, enjoy his family.
One of the things you expect from a Pacino performance is that he's going to get a freakouts, and he does get a great Jimmy Hoffa freakout moment.
Well, I think the solidarity thing is a little bit.
Well, the solidarity, but the best, he's doing this great.
Well, when he's talking to what's his Primo. Oh, he hates that guy.
Not even that. When he's dressing down all of his staff. When he's
and then De Niro, you can talk to him like that. You can talk to me like that.
But when he's doing the whole thing where he's going.
That is funny.
When he's doing the whole thing, he's like, you let him sell insurance to his fucking fathers, locals. Fuck.
Yeah, I know.
He's like losing his mind.
Yep.
And
like it kind of ties into Nicolas Cage last week at The Wicker Man. Like, it's like those actors, every movie they're in, at some point or another, there's gonna be that fucking loud freakout scene. They gotta have it. Doesn't matter what movie it is, what role he's playing. It's got to be in there at some point. Where is it? There it is. It's coming. There it is.
Yeah, it's funny. It's so fucking great. The other thing I thought was really cool as a high, I would say, is just the dead character titles. So there's a whole bunch of sequences in the movies where, there's a whole bunch of sequences in the movie where they'll introduce characters and they'll freeze frame on them and they'll show like a quick title. That says
about how they died.
And all of them are incredibly violent.
Right.
It's like, this guy was shot 75 times in the face in a parking lot in Chicago. And
this one was castrated and thrown off a cliff.
And it's showing you, it's like, this is the way these guys go. This is you want to be in this game.
Well, there were like one or two that was like died of old age or natural causes in his 80s or whatever. It's like,
and a couple of them like seemed like they were the nicer guys. But the point was that it was like, if you want to be a part of this, if you want to be in this game, this is how you go. You go badly. You go violently. There's no dignity or grace or prestige to the end of this. It's that like you live by the sword and you die by the sword. All right, why don't we take a quick break and we'll come back. There's probably a few more highs we have to do and then we'll get into some of the lows. But let's take a quick break and come back for the rest of the episode.
You dumb motherfucker! You let him sell insurance to his fucking fathers! To his fucking fathers! To his fucking father's locals! Damn it!
All right, so coming back from break, I got a few more highs to get into on this flick, and then I think obviously we want to get into the lows. As far as other highs, just real quickly, like to kind of just run through them real quick. I think the screenplay by Steve Zaillian is great. Steve Zaillian also wrote Awakenings, Searching for Bobby Fischer, Civil Action. So this guy's definitely a proven commodity. He's a great writer. And what's really good about this movie, I feel like, is he's got a great kind of ear for dialogue. All the like mob euphemisms that they have in the movie, the painting houses in particular is one of them, where I think they do a really good job visually of explaining what that is when they show De Niro shoot the guy in the back of the head and all the blood hits the wall and you get, oh, okay, this is what paint houses means. But even things like, I do my own carpentry, and like there's a couple other things that are just like these.
Right, there's a lot of hyperbole going on.
Or just euphemisms that they use that are like things that are meant to kind of only like mob guys really know what it means, but it's to hide what's really being said. And then like just like some of the great asides, some of the things, some of the conversational stuff that he writes into the movie that's just kind of, that has nothing really to do with plot forward, but more about like the types of conversations these guys would have. So for instance, when they're towards the end of the movie, when they're in the car and it's the whole thing about, it was a fish. Well, what kind of fish?
Right.
What kind of fish did you
It's like a silly, mundane conversation.
And then like the whole thing with the big ears guy.
It's comic relief.
Yeah.
It breaks some of the tension.
And then like when, it's the whole thing with the big ears guy and it shows up and he's like, you looking at my ears? He's like, I don't know what you're talking about, man. He's like, I had an operation. You could tell everybody, stop looking.
Yeah.
It's just that kind of stuff, I think, draws you into the movie in a different way because it just makes everyone kind of seem more human and fleshed out to a certain degree.
Yeah. But it also, like I said, I think it lives to break some of the tension.
Yeah, for sure.
That's when there's long, drawn-out scenes that it gets heavy for a while, and it's like, it needs something to add some warmth to it, I guess, or to break the tension.
Even like the stuff with like the women at the beginning with their the cigarette breaks and all that stuff is kind of like, I think it's there for that purpose too. Like it shows that this is kind of what it feels like being in the car with these guys, but and like the women, like what's her name? I forget the actress who plays
Charmaine
Bucco. But the fact that she's always holding her cigarette, like after they take a cigarette break, you'll see her in the back seat and she's holding,
already waiting for the next one.
Yeah, she's holding her next cigarette that she's going to start smoking. I think that's really funny.
Yeah. Chain smoker.
Yeah.
She'd be smoking in the car if she could. She tries to at one point, and then Joe Pesci gives her shit.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really funny. Cinematography, I think, is another big high. The cinematographer is Rodrigo Prieto. I hope I'm saying that right. He also shot 25th Hour, which is one of my favorite movies. And he shot a bunch of other Scorsese stuff. He shot Wolf of Wall Street. He shot Silence. He shot episodes of Vinyl. And I think he's attached to do Scorsese's next movie, Killers of the Flower Moon. Scorsese works with pretty much all the best cinematographers.
Yes.
So it's not a surprise that when you watch this movie that it's, visually very beautiful and looks great. One of the things that I really like that he does particularly in this movie is there's this one Steadicam shot that they repeat where there's the opening shot of the movie going through the nursing home, and then there's another shot later where it's the hit in the barbershop.
Yeah.
The kind of the camera is like the Steadicam shot that kind of follows people out of the barbershop and down the hall and then comes back around and then kind of stays outside the door when the hit happens. And they repeat that shot again at the very end of the film. It's like the last shot of the movie with De Niro in his room. When it follows the nurse out, we get to the end of the hall and we follow back, and now it's like another night, and that's when the camera kind of hangs outside the door while the priest is talking to him. So just kind of like a cool visual bookend that they put in there.
No, it is good. It's effective.
And Scorsese,
it's one more way that it demonstrates Martin Scorsese's artistry through cinematography. It's not just the costume or the music or the dialogue. It's also the way he chooses to capture the moments cinematographically speaking.
There you go. That sounds
if
right.
That's, do you know what I mean?
Cinematographically.
I bet that's a word.
Yeah, I mean he's obviously
he's an artist through and through.
And he's very known for doing Steadicam work, which is, it's appropriate that it would be in this movie.
It's one of his favorite toys in his toy box.
So obviously, want to jump into your highs too, but just to round out what I got left here is just some great scenes. I think Scorsese got some of his like kind of classic type of scenes in this movie. One in particular is the testimonial dinner where De Niro's getting the award, and it's the whole "it is what it is" speech where it's like,
what it is.
Well, where Pesci takes Pacino aside and is basically telling him the whole thing, like, hey, you know, there's some people, not me, but some people are thinking you're showing a fundamental lack of appreciation, you know, and he's freaking out, and then you know, Pesci then has to take De Niro aside and be like, I'm talking to him, but he's not hearing it. He's not listening to me. Like, you need to tell him it is what it is. Like, he's got to,
what it is,
you know, and then De Niro takes Pacino aside and has to give him the whole thing where he's basically warning him, like, they're, you know, it's what it is.
I know. And then it's so sad too in that scene where De Niro's trying to tell Pacino, like, it would mean so much more if it came from you. No, you tell him. It's like, you don't understand. They're gonna fucking kill you. Like, he can't say that, but like, He, the whole movie's in euphemisms, like you said. So it's like they're not gonna come out and have the character say that. But De Niro, Pacino knows what he's being told by De Niro, and it's not. He chooses to not listen, or, you know,
well, just and this
in denial about how serious,
yeah,
how deep he's in,
and the way he's just kind of like, hey, in the end, like, only one thing is true. It's my union. Like, I don't give a shit.
Right.
You know, he's willing to go down with the ship, and it's like De Niro knows what his fate is going to be at that point. But it's such a great scene because of the way that it uses the pairings of each of those. So like, it starts with you know, the pairing of Pesci and Pacino having that conversation, and then Pesci and De Niro having that conversation, and then De Niro and Pacino having that conversation, where it's all kind of encapsulated in this one scene, where it's this like ring around the rosy of information that's being passed around that ultimately is going to say, like, look, they're going to, if you don't back off, they're going to kill you. And you got, and then he's saying the whole thing, I got tapes, I know things that they don't know that I know. Yeah. And it's like, you got to stop talking like that, because you're going to seal your own fate here. So at one point, I think the way the scene ends is when Pacino goes and he's dancing with Peggy, and De Niro's just kind of looking at him like he knows, like, this is.
I know, and Peggy's looking too, like she knows what's going on.
So obviously another great scene is the hit on Hoffa and kind of everything that's leading up to that hit. There's this false sense of hope that there's going to be an opportunity to like have a sit down and work things out, because there's the whole thing with Pro and all that craziness that's happened. That's part of the problem with Hoffa not being able to. That's another great scene too. Is there's
lots of great. All their scenes together are great.
Yeah, but like when Hoffa and Pro get into the big fight, and it's like, yeah, I'll apologize.
To a meeting,
yeah, you show up 15 minutes late. Show up 15 minutes late, and you wear shorts. You're trying to say something. He's like, you used a bad term when we were in prison. You said "you people." I want you to apologize for that. And he's like, I'll apologize for that.
Calls him a wop bastard.
Yeah. But anyways, the hit on Hoffa, I mean, like the right up to it, leading up to it, De Niro has this false sense of hope that he's going to be able to somehow just have a sit down and work things out, and then realizes, I think when Pesci says to him, we did everything we could for him. We did everything we could for the man. Right. And, you don't call him, don't tell him. Like, he's giving him the heads up, and then the next day is telling him, you're going to go. Yeah. I had to put you into this, because if I didn't put you into this, you would try to stop it.
Right. Which is true, probably.
And then he drives him to the hit, and he gets on the plane to Detroit. I think he was flying to Detroit. I can't remember.
I think it was Detroit.
But that he takes his sunglasses for him, and it's that cool bookend when he comes back. He's been sitting in the car holding the sunglasses the whole time, like as if time has.
I remember thinking that was a cool bookend.
Yeah,
too.
like as if time has stopped, while he's been gone away making this hit. And then it's just kind of it's very reminiscent of the hit in Goodfellas on Tommy, where Tommy shows up he thinks he's being made, and he shows up and sees that the room is empty, no one's there, and he has that moment of oh no, and then they get shot in the back of the head. Yeah. But the thing that's even I think more sad about this scene is everything leading up to this scene, the whole time that De Niro's in the car and waiting, and he knows, do you have
your gun?
Yeah, yeah, but even just the whole everything leading up to even before they even get Hoffa, that he knows that this is an inevitability. There's nothing he can do to stop
he's there
it.
To do.
He's got to pull the trigger. Yeah. It's going to be him. When they actually do get Hoffa and they get him to the house, you can see this moment of hesitation. Mm-hmm. When he first walks in and he sees that the house is empty and he knows something's up, and he's like, "Let's get out of here." It almost would have been more humane of De Niro to have popped him right then. Yeah. To have not even let him get as he's heading back for the door is when he actually fires the shot, and you can see De Niro in the background holding the gun, hesitating. Yeah.
Psyching himself up like, okay, do it.
But
do it.
but like
you can see the thought. You can see
doesn't want to
he's
do.
thinking in his head, okay, do it. You got to do it. Like,
Or he's like holding out.
himself.
He's holding out for like the last moment, like as if he could prolong it just a moment more. Like maybe it doesn't have to happen, you know. And it's just that whole scene is
delaying
really,
an inevitability.
Yeah, and it's really it's like these are all bad people, obviously, but the you're with these characters up to this point in the movie, and it's like it is very emotionally compelling that you know he doesn't want to do it. You know he doesn't want to have to be the guy to do it. So I think that's a great scene. And then I think the best scene in the entire film is the scene that follows it once he's back home and everyone knows that Hoffa's missing, when he has to go and make the phone call to Hoffa's wife. I think it's like De Niro's best work in the whole movie. And just a really powerful scene where he's doing the whole stammer thing when he's talking on the phone.
He's closing his eyes. It's like he can't even I bet he can't look at himself after that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And he
really
knows
that sense.
he knows that he knows that he's lying to her. He knows that, she's never going to see him again. And also like that they're never going to know. Like he just disappeared. They're not going to find a body. Like
really
they're going to have to
thing.
They're going to have to go through the rest of their lives. Hoffa's family's going to have to go the rest of their lives just not knowing what happened to him. And that he's sitting there and he was the one that did it and can barely choke the words out or try to be comforting to her. It's just a really super emotional and great scene. And then I think he references it later when he's talking to the priest, when the priest is asking him, like, do you have any remorse? And he's like, no, not really. Everything I did, I had to do. And, and then he's thinking, he's like, what kind of man makes a phone call like that? Like, that's the one thing that he can think of that is the one thing that he actually does regret doing. That's Catholic guilt and just all the stuff that Scorsese is great at, like being able to take what should be unlikable characters and humanize them to the degree that we as the audience can watch them and care about a guy like Jimmy Hoffa.
Or feel bad that they got themselves into the mess they got themselves into, maybe in some way.
And then I think it's a great ending too. I think the ending scene is really powerful, where the priest comes to see him at the end, and it's the whole thing where he's saying, can you just leave the door open a crack? I like it open. And he doesn't know that it's Christmas. No one's there to see him. I think it's a cool callback to, there's a scene earlier in the movie when he stays with Hoffa for the first time at his hotel, and he's saying, like, I had to stay in his hotel with him so that the hotel wouldn't have any record that I was there. And when Hoffa goes into he has like the room with the French doors, he like leaves them open a crack. Yeah. And it's like this way of I'm not really alone. Even though I'm alone, I'm not really alone. So that's all I really got for highs. Anything you want to talk about for highs before we jump into?
Yeah. Well, I obviously put that I liked In the Still of the Night. I like the use of that song. It's a classic. In the long tracking shot from the beginning and how that all ties up. And I remember thinking it reminded me a lot of the Copa shot from Goodfellas, and I think that was probably kind of the point. And as you already mentioned, that Martin Scorsese, did he technically pioneer the Steadicam?
No, the Steadicam, the actual Steadicam was, I think when it was built, it was like the first test shots were used in Rocky for the stair scenes. I think that was like a prototype that they were using, and it was really kind of made famous in The Shining, all of the shots going through the overlook and following and tracking with Danny.
Okay. So, but he just did some different things with it, like making it hold longer, I guess, like following people through the interior of a building.
Yeah, the famous shot, what you're talking about, the Copa shot, they're called oneers. So the idea that it's a single shot, and that's the reason that shot's so impressive, is because it moves through such a huge amount of space, and there's so much like people crossing, guys bringing in tables, people in the so much is happening. They have to pre-light all of that, and it's a very technically difficult thing to pull off.
The cars are beautiful in this movie. I put Beansy with exclamation points. I was like, I like that Beansy was in this from Sopranos.
Yeah, it seems like there are a few Soprano alumni that were in this.
I don't know if he's the one I wrote down for some reason.
Well, Charmaine Bucco.
Yeah, that's true.
And then I feel like there was like one or two other Sopranos folks. I can't remember now.
Oh, I like the whole thing where he's throwing the guns in the water.
They can arm a small military if they fished it out.
Yeah. I like the scene where he's in court, Al Pacino, and somebody is in the courtroom. I don't know if it was somebody we're supposed to know, but it was somebody that tries to shoot Jimmy Hoffa, Pacino's character, and his son Chucky stops him or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, "That's my boy, he's all proud." And he goes, "That's right, you charge with a gun, with a knife you run."
Yeah.
It's funny.
They used that line in the trailer too. I remember thinking that was really funny.
But it's just, the whole scene is funny. It's like, it's actually I would say a dramatic scene, but like, he almost got shot, and then it's
played for levity. The rest of it, like the whole scene's played for levity after, where he's like, "Oh, I kind of felt like the pellets. It felt like a little bit of air," and he's holding up his son's arm like he just want to fight or something. Yeah, that is a good scene.
The crooner, I enjoyed the crooner at Frank's testimonial dinner. It reminds me a lot of, again, Goodfellas. The "My life, my love," all that music, like that old timey 50s crooner style music, and I think he had the same singer. I mean, I don't know who the singer was, or I don't even know if it was like Mario Lanza or whatever, but what Italian crooner songs were even being sung. I mean, I know the songs, but I don't know who makes them famous per se. But I could tell it's like, and then when the scene's ending, it's just the instrumental version of, I didn't write the song down. It's the instrument, they do Spanish Eyes. He's singing Spanish Eyes, and that was really pretty. But then it ends with, "Pretend you don't see her, pretend you don't love her." That song. It does an instrumental version of that song. It's like he's not singing it, but it's like the band is playing it. And I'm like, oh, it's like him paying homage to Goodfellas in his movie here when the music does that. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I of course, I really enjoy that. I gravitate towards all that stuff. So it was funny. And that's around the time where Peggy's dancing with Jimmy Hoffa, and she's looking, and she can tell something's up. She knows he's about to get killed, or like that something's going on, and like they're after him.
Yeah. And
that Peggy's character, that's like the one man in her father's life that she doesn't feel unsafe with.
Yeah, she actually respects
has like
him
almost
or
like
admires
a uncle,
him.
like, or fatherly. She's probably closer to him than even her own father. You know what I mean?
That was another scene. We didn't really talk about that scene, but I think that was we talked a little bit about like Peggy and his relationship, but when Russ is trying to warn him early on, when he's saying, "Oh, she doesn't like me," and he's like, "Oh, well, she's kind of like that around me," and he's going, "Look, she can feel uncomfortable around me, but you're her father. You really need to get on that now."
That should be a wake up call that there's something wrong.
Because he's saying like, me and my wife, we can't have kids. You're so blessed. This, that, and the other thing. Almost warning him like, if you don't get your arms around this now, it's going to be a problem later. And of course, that's what comes to pass, is that because he's alienated his family for so long, by the end, none of his daughters give a shit about him, especially Peggy, because Peggy really sees him for what he is.
I can't even say doesn't give a shit. I think she's afraid of him to the end. Like, she just doesn't want anything to do with him because she knows he's bad news, and she doesn't feel safe. Even when Robert De Niro's character goes to visit the younger sister, she says it. She's like, "We never felt safe. We never felt like we could come to you."
Yeah, if we told you something, we knew you'd do something terrible.
He probably didn't even realize that he was making his daughters feel unsafe. I'm sure he could tell there was a distance and a fear of him, but the fact that his daughters felt unsafe from him, like, I bet he didn't even realize that until it was said to him.
That all comes from...
He thought he was always protecting them, but he didn't realize that he was actually almost doing more damage than good.
Yeah. That all comes from the scene that I think might be a perfect segue for us to get into the lows. Because that all comes out of the scene where he beats up the grocery store guy. The biggest low of this film, if we're going to get into it, now's the time to do it, is the de-aging.
Absolutely.
It's not quite there as far as believability. And the bigger issue with the de-aging for me, personally, isn't so much the way that the faces look. I was never really convinced that these guys were supposed to be the age that they're supposed to be in the scenes based on the way their faces look, even with the de-aging technology applied. But that being said, like, I was almost willing to give that a pass. The thing that's really the trouble with the de-aging is that you can't de-age physicality. And this scene in particular is really where the biggest problem is when De Niro goes to beat the shit out of this grocery store guy because he pushed Peggy. It's all shot in this big master wide shot, and you see De Niro pull this guy out of the store, throw him through the window, he throws him down on the curb, and he's like kicking the guy. And like, you're looking at it, and the way De Niro's standing, his gait, like just the way he's standing, he's got like one arm kind of limp hanging. He just looks like an old guy. It's like even with the you can't de-age the physicality of someone.
Wasn't
and the problem
there even
is
a scene in the movie where Al Pacino was trying to get up and he was getting up too slow.
Well, yeah,
And
that's
the director's like, just try to get up a little bit faster.
well,
He's supposed to be in your 40s.
That's another part of it is that like I remember them saying that Scorsese, like at one point, I think it's the scene where Pacino is sitting around with his family and they're watching Kennedy on TV that he won the election. And he's complaining, these billionaires' kids, blah, 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 blah. And he goes to get out of the chair. And Scorsese had to like say, all right, you look like a 76-year-old guy getting out of a chair. At this point in the story, you're supposed to be in your 50s. Like try to get up with a little bit more spring, a little bit more energy. And that's the problem is that the de-aging technology is not going to de-age their physicality, and we've watched Robert De Niro beat the shit out of people in movies for years. We know what it's supposed to look like. We know what Robert De Niro looks like when he's kicking the shit out of someone. You're watching it and it just looks like an old guy.
I know.
I don't mean to be disrespectful when I say that, but it just does.
This is exactly the same stuff I feel like it really takes me out. If he had cast younger people during the younger years of these actors' storylines, it would have been way more effective. I think it could have actually been. I think this movie could have had more to it if it had been done that way. I think it served to be a detriment to the movie. I mean, the performances were good, but
it doesn't take me out of the movie to the degree that I think it took you out of the movie. Like for me, I'm willing to overlook some of the de-aging problems because the story's so captivating and the performances are so good.
Okay.
And the way
well, maybe that's what I meant to say. It's like it's very distracting, but that's what I mean when I say it takes me out of it though too. And it's like I could have been more, I want to say invested, but more like I believe this is really this world if he had gone with younger actors for the younger scenes. It reminds me that it's a movie when I'm taken out of it like that. But unless like this is a journey I'm on. So this is someone's story, The reason this movie cost so much money to make was because of the de-aging technology, and that is even sadder to me because I feel like they failed with that. Yeah, it is. But again, especially after the deep fake things you showed. Well, the deep fake thing, that's another thing we can even talk about, and this is kind of I would say people should check this out because this really blew my mind. Obviously, like the deep fake technology is getting it's just getting astonishing. Like they have the video online of where they replace Jack Nicholson with Jim Carrey in scenes of The Shining, and it looks like it's amazing. The other one that's great is the Home Stallone, where they put Sylvester Stallone's face on Macaulay Culkin for Home Alone. So is the whole thing with the deepfake like that? They have to have a similar face shape or something. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not even going to pretend to understand how that technology works, but. What it seems to look like for me really is the eyes, is that they're able to kind of put the eyes over a similar face shape, so that it looks it's more convincing. Now they did a bunch of scenes from The Irishman where they took the de-aged version of The Irishman, and then some guy on YouTube took the deep fakes where he was like going back to De Niro from like Goodfellas or from Taxi Driver or wherever, and when you look at the deep fake, it looks better. It was astonishing. Yeah, and it was kind of amazing. Now, and you said it was cheaper too. So it's like that's all the more reason why it's so sad. This is wait a second. I don't know that you can do an apples to apples comparison, and the reason I would just say that is that this guy didn't take the original footage of The Irishman like before it was de-aged and do this. So I don't know enough about the technology to say, hey, the fact that he's got the de-aged version that he's putting the other face on is what's making it work versus if he had to actually work with the footage that was originally shot, would it still work? I don't know. I don't know enough about the technology, but it is a little bit startling to look at this stuff and be like, wow, the stuff that this guy on YouTube was doing almost looks a little bit better than some of the stuff that got in the Netflix film for $150 million. Absolutely. Would that play on a 40-foot screen? Would it start to fall apart? I don't know, maybe, but on our 49-inch TV in the living room, it looked pretty good. Yeah. All that being said, Scorsese wanted to pull his toys out of the attic, and what I mean by that is he wanted to get these specific actors and put them in a movie where he didn't have to cast 3 different people to play Jimmy Hoffa at 3 different points of his life. He didn't have to cast 3 different people to play Frank Sheeran at 3 different points in his life. He wanted to be able to take one actor and have one unified performance and carry it through different decades of the story. Does it work as far as the technology goes? No, I don't think so. I don't think we're quite there yet, unfortunately, and I do think it can get distracting. But I'm willing to suspend disbelief. It didn't pull me
out of the story enough for it to be like, oh, this is what ruins the movie. And I also feel like Scorsese's earned the right to make the movie this way, is to say, listen, if we're going to give $200 million to comic book film directors to go make movies where people are fighting shit in the sky, like, I want to make a movie where I'm going to take one actor and make him seem like he's 30, 40, 50, 60.
One could make the argument that he should have gone with younger actors and then put makeup on them to make them look older later. The reason he chose those 3 actors in particular was because those are 3 actors maybe not Al Pacino. This is his first time working with Al Pacino, right?
Yeah.
Technically.
Mm-hmm.
But with Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro, he wanted to take these 3 great actors from the school he grew up in, like the school of filmmaking he grew up in, and this is all of them, including Scorsese, are in the twilight years of their career, and you get why he went with those actors. And I'm not saying the performances weren't great; they were great. It's the fact that it's not as pure, it's not as true to what reality is. Here's and no reality is this man in his 30s. Right. You know what I mean? I just didn't.
Here's where I can meet you in the middle, and this is what I would say is, like, specifically that scene we were talking about where De Niro beats the shit out of the guy. It's all shot in a wide shot. It's not shot in close up.
That's probably why it's in a wide
shot.
shot.
Why not get a younger actor to do the physical parts?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then
really see his face.
superimpose the face on it. Do you know what I mean? Like that's where I can understand some of the physicality, I think, would have been improved if they were willing to make that concession. When it comes to the faces, yeah, I don't ever really buy that they looked. I think there's one shot when they show De Niro when he's supposed to be in the war and he like executes those 2 guys. That looked pretty good, but again, that was one of those things where he's kind of half in shadow. You can tell that they're using like the face of Travis Bickle. You can tell that that's like they're literally kind of superimposing that face on him. He doesn't have to really talk or do much, so they can get away with it. That was maybe one of the only times where it really looked kind of convincing. And the rest of it, yeah, I don't ever buy that De Niro is supposed to be in his 30s or in his 40s in this movie. I don't ever buy it. But for me, it's a small concession to make. If you're willing to take that leap and say, listen, I get to watch Robert De Niro in 3 hours of this movie as opposed to maybe only at the end of the movie where he could only play the older version of Frank Sheeran, I'm willing to take that leap with Scorsese. It doesn't pull me out enough for it to kind of tip the scales and make this movie seem like it was a waste of money or it wasn't worth doing. I think he got to make it the way that he needed to make it for the story that he was trying to tell. And also, like I said, like when we were talking about putting a capstone on it and having the final word, it was like he wanted to use the guys that he wanted to use for it to be as effective.
Well, that's another thing I was going to say was that I think in a lot of ways it's like you said, he's certainly earned the right to do whatever he wants and cast whoever he wants in his roles and make a movie about whatever he wants at this point in his career. He's earned that right. But it's also, I think, a swan song for all of them. It's like this is... I'm sure they still might do other movies, all of these men, but that this is kind of the last movie of this era of films and filmmaking. And all the more reason why maybe some of those comments that the discussion we were having earlier in the podcast about the Marvel discussion, it might be all the more poignant because this is like the end of this kind of, like, what kind of movies are being made like this? I mean, like, there are some, but it's like it's becoming more and more an exception to the rule.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that a movie like this had to get made through Netflix, it wasn't going to get made through a major studio. There's been a couple of movies this year that honestly have shocked me that it got made. You know, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was one of the examples that people would use as like, wow, see, that's a personal filmmaker-driven story, that the type of movie that doesn't get made so much anymore. But to me, it's a love letter to Hollywood. Hollywood has no problem producing movies that are a love letter to Hollywood. So that's not as good an example.
Like La La Land.
Something like The Lighthouse. Yeah. Like that, it's amazing that a movie like that was able to get made in a system like A24. That studio is really kind of pioneering the types of movies that I think could go extinct at this point.
Yeah.
So like a movie as crazy and weird and bizarre as The Lighthouse, I don't think it would have ever got made if you didn't have a Pattinson and a Willem Dafoe to jump on board. You know, if it had been smaller actors, it probably would have never got made. But that's kind of like a little bit of a beacon of light or a beacon of hope that there's still going to be those types of movies that can get made. But I think you're right. I think that the Scorsese type of film you're going to see, unfortunately, less and less of them going to theaters. If they're going to get made at all, they're going to get made on streaming services, and that's kind of a bummer.
That's sad
because that's
kind of
what
a tragedy.
You want these types of
And this is what he meant when he made those comments, and people want to act like, oh, he's against comic. You know what?
Let's not get into
no
all
one's
that again.
I'm just saying, but no one's taking the comic movies away. But they're taking these movies away.
Yeah. This was we made
don't want to go see him.
We made a specific effort. This came out on it came out, I think, on November 27th was when it came out on streaming. But we made a concerted effort to go see it while it was in the theater before it came out on Netflix. Because if I'm going to see a Martin Scorsese movie, that's how I want to see it. If I'm going to see any movie, quite frankly, I still think a superior experience is to go see it in a movie theater. But I also understand the convenience of like a Netflix. And obviously it's great to be able to sit in your own house and enjoy a huge, vast library of movies that you have access to now. So, it's great that Netflix got this movie made, and it got it made the way that he wanted to have it made. Yeah. But, I hope that this is not, I hope that there is more hope for, like these mid-range movies, these movies that aren't either super, super indie or just giant blockbusters. There's got to be these middle ground films that can still get made and find an audience. This one technically is like a big budget movie if you consider how much money had to go into the technology to do the de-aging part of it. But again, I don't disagree that there's problems with it, but I'm willing to overlook it. It doesn't hurt the movie for me to the degree that it may for some people. Right.
I mean, like I said, when I made the analogy earlier in the podcast about pizza, I mean, it's a really not so good analogy, I guess, but it's not analogy. That this movie is great, but it's not the greatest to me, and I think that it could have been better under some circumstances, and I know that is taken or can be taken as almost blasphemy when you look at who we're talking about here in this movie.
And you have the right. You listen. Everything Martin Scorsese makes doesn't have to be amazing, It's but what I would say is that
you're saying like the low energy of it at times and through a lot of it is actually intentional. It's not because it's slow, and it's because it's on purpose. It's supposed to be like a dread-inducing.
It's the movie is slower than his other movies, but it's not slower because he lost a step. It's not slower because he doesn't know what he's doing. It's slower. It almost
felt that way though.
It's slower.
When I left the theater, I remember feeling a little bit that way.
Like he lost a step. Like
I remember feeling like he was trying to make a movie in the vein of Goodfellas, and it wasn't kind of like that. But I mean, and you're right. And maybe with more time, being away from it, watching it again, you feel a little bit differently. You see it a little bit differently. You understand things a little bit differently. And I know that now, I mean, yeah, it makes sense that it was probably more of an intentional choice for the pacing and for it to feel different than a Goodfellas. It's not supposed to have the same energy as a Goodfellas. It's
Definitely
just because the subject matter is so similar that I expected it to be maybe. And it wasn't supposed to be like Goodfellas.
The comparison...
It was never supposed to be.
It wasn't supposed to be Goodfellas. The comparison that I would make for this movie, as far as like filmmakers and style of movie goes, is I would say like David Fincher, in my opinion, made the two greatest serial killer movies of all time. Okay, Seven, which is very much the cop-driven, detective-driven, kind of like your standard type of serial killer movie. The cops are chasing the killer; they have to figure out who he is before they run out of time. It's a high octane, but obviously done in this amazingly artistic way that David Fincher is amazing at doing. I think that's like one of the seminal serial killer movies. It's one of my favorite. Now, conversely, on the flip side, he also made Zodiac, which is about a real killer, about the Zodiac killer, but the style of it is completely different. It's a much more. The movie's not told from the perspective of detectives. It's told from journalists. It's told actually from a cartoonist is the main character of the movie. Who's just obsessed with trying to solve the puzzle, and it's done in a more journalistic. It's a little bit more of a slower burn. The violence when it happens in the movie is a little bit more, like the most violent scene in the movie takes place in broad daylight. It's very quiet. It's not. There's not a whole lot of style to it.
So scary.
But where the climax of Seven is two detectives facing down this evil killer who's put the head of a woman in a box, is the climax of Seven. When you get to the climax of Zodiac, it's a guy looking at another guy in a hardware store and just them staring at each other and him knowing like in his head, okay, I found you.
Right.
And they're both great serial killer movies, but they're just told in a completely different style. So I feel like, Martin Scorsese for me made the seminal mob movie with Goodfellas. I like Goodfellas even better than I like The Godfather. I think it's the greatest mob movie of all time. But he also made this movie, The Irishman, which in its own way is a counterpart to Goodfellas, but it's the same world but told kind of through a different perspective.
Yeah.
And it's meant to be more differently paced and slower and to kind of be more melancholy and sad and be more about the finality and the messaging of this is what it is. It is what it is. It's that line.
That could have been another title for the movie. It's what it is.
But I thought we were going to disagree a lot more than we did in this episode. I
think we disagreed enough.
All right. Well, hopefully it'll be great to see if they do good at the Oscars next Sunday. I'd love to see Marty get one more.
Of course.
I feel like he probably should have more than the one that he has now. But obviously it would be great.
He still only has one.
Only has one. Only one from The Departed. Never, he was nominated for like Taxi Driver and Raging Bull and
Never won
Goodfellas.
before that, I know.
Gangs of New York. Never won for any of them.
No, that's a real tragedy.
But it'll be nice to see him grab one this year. And then obviously would love to see Thelma Shoemaker because she's just like one of the most fantastic. The editing in all his movies is so great, and she's a great collaborator. It'd be great to see her get it. It'd be great to. I don't think it stands a chance for Best Picture, but at least Best Director would be really cool to see Marty get it again. All right, so let's flip a coin for next week. We've already got our highs and lows picked out for either one, but again, always want to remind folks to write into moviehighlow@gmail.com. Send us your high and low recommendations, and let us know for the movie that you're sending if it's high or low and why it's a high or low film. Let's flip this. Heads. So we're going high for next week. Again, 2 high in a row. That's pretty good.
All right.
So it seems apropos that next week will be Valentine's Day, or when we release this, it'll be Valentine's Day. So we're going to go with Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind by Michel Gondry, which is one of my favorite movies.
It's a favorite movie of both of us.
Yeah, and it feels like it's
a favorite movie of both of ours.
Both of our favorite movie.
It's a favorite movie of both of us.
It's a favorite. It's a personal.
I can't figure out what the right way to word that is, but
yeah, it's a personal favorite of ours. Mm-hmm. So, all right. Well, thank you guys for listening, and check back with us next week when we review Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind by Michel Gondry, and we will see you on the next episode.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Tony told the old man to tell me to tell you it's what it is.
At the end, there's only one thing that's real. This is my universe.